train them in how to kind of navigate the system and use kind of a relational approach to work with individuals who kind of have fallen through the cracks. And we also do a community awareness and education component, which is what this is, in which we do forums. We try and do them a few times a year, and we try to attack some sort of issue involving poverty, that relates to poverty. And the racial and political issue has been something that we've really wanted to do, and we really didn't know quite how to do it, and we said, well, let's just do it and see what happens. As one of the things that I am personally passionate about is having bipartisan discussions in which we really get a chance to listen to people who we would normally disagree with or write off on Facebook or see their headlines. And we tend to be it's very easy today to be kind of in your own mind and discussing your own beliefs, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with being communicative, but we also want to offer people who disagree with us the chance to to speak. So this forum is really a way to address the fact that certainly in this media age and all sorts of community activism rallies and things like that, we tend to see a lot of preaching to the choir. We tend to, I'm going to be more inclined to go see someone speak who I agree with what they write or what they talk about, and much less inclined to go see someone speak that I don't. I do that as well. So what we wanted to do was offer an alternative to that. And certainly in the last 2 days alone, it has been made abundantly clear that we need to have conversations like this. If we're going to address issues, especially issues like race and poverty and partisan politics, we absolutely have to be able to sit down together and have a productive conversation. So that being said, already that gives this panel a lot of respect and credit for being here, because this is certainly not these aren't easy topics to discuss, and we have some very highly respected members of our community here, and I really want to get to the meat of this discussion, so I'll be brief, and certainly if you have more questions about any of these individuals, I'm sure they'd be happy to discuss more of their biographies with you. We have Lovely Warren, who is the president of the Rochester City Council and is also running in a primary for mayor of the City of Rochester. Okay, we have Lovely, and I'm very thrilled that she's here. I started talking with her about this a few months ago and was just happy that she even gave me, the chance to just come and sit down and talk with her. She didn't know who I was or anything. So. Rachel Barnhart, who is, if you don't recognize her already, is a news anchor and journalist in City of Rochester. She also writes a blog in which she tackles lots of issues, everything related to the City of Rochester. She's born and raised in Rochester and likes to discuss everything from education to development. And we have Tony Davis, who is, if you haven't heard him already, he's the full-time chaplain with Good News Jail and Prison Ministry and the chief chaplain for the Flower City Chaplain Corps. And Tommy's very active in the community with regards to this chaplaincy, addressing crime and things like that with spirit for that. And Ayesha is the president of the New York State Frederick Douglass Foundation, and is we like to call her a community activist as well. And Reverend Marlon Washington, you're one of the founding pastors, correct, of your church, Christ Community Church, and is currently running for Rochester City Council as well. And I, again, welcome all of our panelists here. Here's how it's going to go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask specific questions of each of our panelists, and they're just going to be 2 questions. The reason for this is I want to ask the questions that, to give each of these individuals an opportunity to, kind of talk, gives us a chance to get to know them and how they approach things. And we'll do 2 questions for each of the panelists. They will be specific to the panelists, and then we'll open it up for a discussion. The first 2 questions are going to be specifically related to just race and politics. And I'm going to get started right here with, and then at the end we'll have an opportunity to ask questions. Okay, so, in your opinion and experience, we know some of this has had an impact on even your race right now. How much of a role, if any, should race play in an election, and how does that impact both your constituents as well as your opponent?
For me, I don't think that I look at race as a factor in this particular election. The city of Rochester to me is a complete dichotomy. When I say a dichotomy, I mean that it is a tale of two cities, where you have a city that's moving forward, where you're talking about development and projects and other things. But when you look at the disparities and things that impact the poorest part, which just happens to be black and brown mostly, and you see that we're seventh in the nation for childhood poverty, last in the nation when it comes down to graduating African American men, and second to last for Latino men. I believe our infant mortality rate is 46%. It bothers me that you have this other sort of world that is made up of black and brown people that is stagnant or going down. And I believe at this point in time you need someone that can bridge the gap between these two particular worlds. And that's the reason why I'm running. For me, I was born and raised in the city of Rochester. My father struggled with drug use. My mother was a single mom for a part of my life and worked 2 jobs to put my sister and I through high school and college, and went to Catholic school for a while. And so I understand this world that seems to have lost hope and lost faith. And I want to be able to tell them, look at me. You don't have to be a victim of your circumstance. You can do this. And we can be one community if we really focus on really dealing with the issues that impact that community. It just so happens that that community is predominantly African American and Latino.
Mr. Davis.
Okay.
I'm sorry. You have a separate question. Separate question. Okay. Should race influence political affiliation, and how has, I know this is one of your strong suits, how has history impacted the association of race with politics and parties?
What I do think it's very important that we become identified with some political philosophy in order to be recognized. People need to know what we stand for. When it comes down to poverty, you teach people how to get a job, give them training, but don't provide a comfort zone where they feel comfortable on welfare. And so I don't like bringing politics in, but you cannot escape that philosophy, because I believe if we're going to have a strong country, a strong community, we have to have responsible and strong citizens.
Okay, and Mr. Washington. Now you're obviously, have you held an elected position before, or is this will be your first one? Okay. So this is kind of looking ahead. So we discussed, Ms. Warren discussed how to, if anything, role race should play the campaign piece of it or the election process. How can, once elected officials promote racial reconciliation without the appearance of taking sides of their own alienating one side or the other?
I think it's important that we lend a moral obligation, and that there is, in addition to the legislative side of being an elected leader, there is a moral obligation to respect all, to encourage all, to help lift the bootstrap of each other. And that needs to be espoused by the elected leaders to go forward in that vantage point. I think it's very, very important that leadership exudes inspiration. I think it's very important, regardless if it's the church, community leaders, even politicians, not all law and order, but it has to be about inspiring. And it has to be about lending hope where they might not be. And I think one of the problems that we see in the lay of the land and governance is that we don't hear the hope. We don't hear the inspiration that needs to come out, to inject in the elbow of all of us, but not the black people only, or the white people only, or the Latino only. Inspiration is colorblind. And once in office, when I get there, it will be a colorblind situation, because I have resolved that, you know, I got where I am. It wasn't because just the black person helped me or the white person helped me, but it was people who just loved me and cared for me and about me. And I think that's what we need even in government today.
Thank you. A quick follow-up with that. I hadn't planned this, but so if that being said, because that sounds wonderful. You know, in reality, you know, it's going to take more leadership like that, so that that's why, you know, in reference to kind of talking about, you know, how do you work with this, how does that impact both constituents as well as, you know, opponents or other elected officials? You know, how do you overcome that, you know, where you might want to be leading from a place of colorblindness and hope and opportunity and all these things? How can you influence the constituents to do that as well?
It's the bully pulpit effect.
Yeah.
It's the bully pulpit effect.
Yeah.
I do it in my own real pulpit.
Yeah.
Okay. And to me, I got the best training, because now I have it in a large pulpit where it's just simply saying that we are here to keep saying the same message. We don't have to keep repeating the message. Just keep saying the same message over and over and over until someone gets it and until someone understands. Yeah, it's idealistic, true, and there are going to be others who will try to block and stop, you know, a person who is trying to exude that very message. But the issue is you can't stop. You cannot quit. And, you know, you don't get where you are, you know, and get there easy. But you got to go, and you're going to be hit here, there, and what have you. But it has to be the point where you cannot quit, and you know where the goal is and the end goal, and get there, and design to get there in the best possible effective way.
How does political division increase racial division, and what can be done to overcome that?
Say that again.
We're going to have a chance to discuss this. You know, I'm
just
trying to get our feet wet. You know,
sorry. I just wanted to make sure.
How does political division increase racial division?
Well, I think it's a great question.
I should have got that.
I think that it's very easy within the political realm, because it's already something that's, you know, it's already partisan. So the goal is obviously to win, and the climate of today, not so much in our past, but in today, you know, keeping people divided, classified into groups, whether it be racial, man, woman, whatever it is, you group people out, right? Not only do we market to them differently, or we say, well, this is how women vote this way, or that, you know, it's a natural type of thing. Well, people, right, birds of a feather flock together. So if I have a background, in, not necessarily racially, but even class-wise, right? If I come from a lower income, I might be more inclined to be able to identify more with someone who's low income. Then, you know, so each one of these pockets, so we have them all, and then once politics comes in and you want to win, you're like, okay, well, instead of getting people to vote for me, they're constantly trying to get people to vote against that other person. Instead of saying, again, you know, I do agree, you know, bridging the divide and saying, okay, one of the things that we do, you know, like the Frederick Foundation, I don't want you to look at an R or D behind your name. Sure, you know, I might be a Republican, but in the end, if you say you have a value system, and then you should be voting that value system. But in the political realm, they can't afford that on either side. You want power, right? You want to keep your power, you want to get elected, and so the only way to do that is to keep people divided too often. And I think that's, you know,
probably the simplest way maybe to what I would say how they keep people divided and how they play with each other.
Did you want to ask that?
Yeah, well, one of the things that really concerned me is when politicians run for office is that when they run a campaign, they always have to have, and I'm just going to say this not out of me being who I am, but and I find this coming from the Democratic camp a lot. And every time they run a campaign, they always have to have a program announcing it for black people. And we just went to the booth based on a program and not a vision. So that really aggravates me. So that's polarizing to the fullest. And it angers me because people, when you speak against it, they don't see it as I want them to improve their human capital. They look at it as, oh, you just don't like it. You just don't like us. You Republicans don't like us. And that's not true. We value human citizenship. We want to be able to increase human capital in society, not government bureaucracy.
Okay. Did anyone else want? Because I know this was kind of more of a loaded question. I'm getting more. I'm trying to follow the body language. Lovely or Mark, did anyone want to answer that?
Not yet.
Okay. I'm just trying to make sure that everybody gets a chance. Again, this is going to be supposed to be productive, and it's okay if it gets tense. It's okay if it
I don't
gets
want you to get mad at me.
challenging. This is a safe space.
I'm always mad.
The point is to be able to have these conversations and understand that reconciliation does not mean agreement. It means unity in spite of differences, and because of differences, because that makes things interesting, right? Okay. Rachel. No, Rachel. I'm on you right now. So you have an interesting background as someone who is white, who grew up in, you went to John Marshall High School, right? So you have kind of an interesting background. You're a lifelong Rochesterian. You've kind of grown up in the city, and now we're kind of seeing the other side of things from both the leadership perspective, journalism, media, everything. So what is your impression of how race relations have evolved in Rochester, and is the reality different from the perception?
I really agree with what Lovely said about that. I do think there are two Rochesters, and I saw it. Yes, I went to Marshall High, but I also grew up on Seneca Parkway in a middle-class home with two parents who were educators in the city school district. And I think my takeaway from going to Marshall High School was, I think there were 500 kids in my freshman class, and I think our graduating class only had about 150. That hasn't changed today. And I think the biggest heartbreak for me was growing up with people who dropped out of school, had babies in high school, died, went to jail, and I never really got over that. I have to be honest with you. I never got over that. It's just incredible. You use the term human capital, and an incredible waste of potential. I went to school with such smart people, and that was really heartbreaking for me. And it really stayed with me, and I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to become a reporter, was because I was always obsessed with news, working at, I was always obsessed with news. My parents always had the news on, they always had the paper, and so I just really enjoyed reading about news. And it always struck me that when I had a classmate who was killed, the coverage paled in comparison to when, someone in the suburbs was killed. And I do understand why that is the way that is more today. But as far as race relations, I believe that most people are very good, and I believe that most people do want to help their neighbors, no matter what side of life they are on. I do believe that, but I also believe that we have incredible segregation and isolation in our city, and I do think there are very much two Rochesters. And that's not to say that the one Rochester doesn't care about the other. I think they do, but I think there is a big gulf in the middle, and I think we still struggle to bridge that today.
It's interesting to bring that up because, Lovely, one of the things that I find interesting is that, so we're New York State. New York State is a very Democratic state. However, Monroe County is large, leadership-wise, is more Republican, and the city is much more Democrat. The county legislature has, it's 19 Republicans, 10 Democrats, and 8 of the 10 are from the City of Rochester, So that right there, I mean, because Rachel just touched on this point of, you know, the two Rochesters, and you have to look at Rochester and also kind of in the context of the county as well, when you talk about bridging that gap. You know, how do you see that working? As someone, you know, I'm involved in local politics as well, and as someone who kind of has a real desire to see the county leadership connect better with the city leadership. How do you see that, you know, working out? And I'm sorry to ask you this more about the campaign stuff, because this isn't a mayoral debate or anything like that.
It's okay.
It's more that I think you might be able to get some good insight on that.
I have to agree with Rachel's statement that I do believe that the one Rochester cares about the other Rochester. And it's evident in the fact that when you look at what people give to the United Way in Monroe County is basically as much as Syracuse, Buffalo, and Albany combined. And so you have people that care about this problem and they continue to give to it, but things are not getting better. And I think that Mr. Davis might be surprised because I believe that it has to do with you have to teach people how, or you have to give people a hand up and not a handout. You have to teach people how to be self-sufficient. You know, I would rather teach a person how to fish than give them a fish. And I think that that's what we continuously do in this community. When you look at, you know, job opportunities, and you're fighting battles to say, you know, open the door and allow people to come in. Or even when we look at our educational system, how do I expect a child to be able to compete on a global level if they can't read? If we're not preparing them for this global society? How do we help parents become self-sufficient when some of them have to quit their jobs because of the fact that, you know, daycare subsidies and other things are being cut? So I think that we look at things completely different. And also, when you look at funding, you get more money for doing bad than you do for doing good. You know, we told around the fact that, you know, the city of Rochester, we got more, what's the term for this, dollars?
The AMA?
Not AMA. It's not CDBG. CDBG money, which is considered community block grant dollars, is based on a formula of how many poor people you have. And so the poorer we get, the more money we receive. That's not, you know, to me, that's not nothing to be proud about.
Come on now.
You know, so, and that's a message that you have to give to people. Listen, we can do this. Working together, hand in hand, we can do this, but everybody has a role to play. And everybody needs to do their particular part. Now, there may be systematic barriers that are in place that causes some of those problems, but I believe that the government's role is to do its very best to use those dollars to help people become self-sufficient, not to continue the cycle generation after generation.
And that's going to bring up to that, the poverty discussion that we'll get to in a little bit, because there's lots of good stuff in there to discuss. Okay. So certainly some of the main issues that impact, you know, and I want to be clear when we go into the next set of questions that we want to be sure to we're not identifying poverty as solely an inner city issue anymore, because it's not. This is, you know, poverty is extending into the suburbs and certainly in rural areas more than ever now. So I want to just be, you know, just a side note there. Understand that when we're talking about poverty and you know, minority issues in the inner city, we're not saying that this is the only place that these are, but this is the specific consideration. Ayesha, so what I wanted to talk about here is some of the issues that seem to have direct relation to poverty, and certainly in the inner city area. Issues like education, health, family unit, jobs, things like that. And then we're going to have Rachel segue us into the last piece and talking about how we need all of this stuff. So Ayesha, you're someone who is an advocate for certainly families, strong families. How have policies helped to hurt the family unit? And what can be done about that?
In probably every way. I mean, I think Lovely actually touched on a bunch of it, and there are, again, I think that we all come from a place where we all want to help, and we all see the problem and want to help the problem. We just, I think, sometimes look at different ways to get there.
Right.
But with that said, when we look at how a lot of the programs, government bureaucracy, hurts the family is, I mean, you said you are incentivized to do poorly. If the husband isn't there, then you're, going to get more money. Instead of something like, and again, it's just one of our little things that we like to, that I do, I think we should be advocating is, okay, well, why aren't we incentivizing people to, if they happen to get, pregnant and, all of these things, incentivize them to, okay, well, how can we make this a unit so that you guys can be married? If you do get married, incentivize that for a little while. And there's a lot of specifics that you have to that. So that, hey, if you stay married, then you get an influx of money. And that you are able to, that you can build something so that you can have some type of savings so that you can put away for your kids, so that you can take your kids out of the public school system. 9% graduation rate for black males. I don't have any boys, all girls. I would not put my kids in a Rochester City school if I had a black male. I am from Jump Street, giving my kid a 9% chance of success. So we have these government programs that come in that are, again, send your kid, what is it, there's a couple schools, 10 hours a day in school. You want to feed my kid breakfast, lunch, and dinner? That's, to me, that's not a good solution. If we were talking about education, okay, well, how do I help you to give your child breakfast, lunch, and dinner somehow, to get you even into the school somehow? Or, if you are on some, type of program in some way. And I think the rural schools, as we talk about poverty and both, they actually do a lot of things that are a little bit different than the city. And they do things like that, where you can get discounts on your education and stuff. Because they'll have the same exact poverty rate, and black children in the rural counties actually have, they have almost an 80% graduation rate versus in the city. And so I look at it, I go, it's the same disparity, it's the same poverty rate, everything's the same. The only difference is one city and one rural. Well, what's the difference? The difference is the way community surrounds those people, and the way that the government runs a little bit looser, I think, in the rural communities. And so all of these programs that we have, from start to finish, education, it's not a safety net, it's a spider web. All it's doing is taking and weaving into our family lives. And instead of saying, I want to teach you how to fish, it's saying, I need to be self-sustaining as a government, therefore I have to continue to make it work and keep you in these programs. And that means making sure that families don't work, because that is the biggest contributing factor. Two-parent home, even if you're poor, you are on top of your children, and you have so much more. I'm just going to, little hyperbolic here, but I look at some of my family situations and how my sister, who I look up to tremendously, worked her finger to the bone to make sure she has 4 kids, single mom, to make sure that she just was able to provide for them, and she still was on the system. But the TV raised her kids, and the system, school raised her kids, and it's reflective. And my family kind of tore me up a little bit when I was like, well, I'm just going to stay home and work part-time and have less money because I want to be with my kids, because I was a single mom too. But it was a choice that I made, that I knew that I had, that was, I'm starting off on a bad foot by being a single parent, by being a mom. I'm already disadvantaging my child. And the system just wants to come in there and be my kid's father. They want to be, they want to be my husband, and they want to be my father. And they're trying to take the place of our family, and we have to stop that and say, no, sorry, help me, give me a hand up, not a handout. And, I agree with that 100%. what she's saying, and our system has to be completely dismantled and remade, broken.
How about, we'll go back to Marta. What is this, going to, a little bit, but we'll come back for sure. What is the role of as a pastor and, a theological background as well, what is the role as a church in promoting your pandemic policies that may be damaging to specific,
Say it again.
I'm sorry. What is the role of the church? As a church leader, what do you feel the role of the church is in dealing with these issues overall, whether it's supporting your pandemic policy, speaking out on issues?
I think the church should always be in the forefront of social issues, social justice, whatever you want to term it, however you want to term it. It's been that way historically. And it's been that way even, not that it's the black church or what have you, but biblically it's always been that way since the beginning of biblical time. The purpose, I think, of faith has to be, we take the faith and we transfer it into the tangibles. So how do we see what it is we're talking about, and how do we apply what we're talking about in life, and infuse that in our society, at least in terms of the moral. No, not in terms of, you got to be Baptist, or you got to be like me, Lutheran, or you got to be like me, Presbyterian. But in terms of the church, at once upon a time, the church was all things to all people. At one point in our society, the church was everything. Growing up, I'm not from Rochester, but I am a New Yorker from the Bronx. And in between the Bronx and Harlem, where I primarily lived, and all of my church life growing up was in Harlem. The church was all. It was the cheese line, it was the clinic,
That's right.
it was the housing authority,
Amen.
it was everything you can imagine, and that's how I grew up. That's how I lived. And so that in of itself empowered us. The church was seen as self-help. It wasn't seen as a handout.
Right.
It was always seen as a point of self-help, and we call it self-help empowerment. And so the church, I think the church has in some ways balked its own system and went away because, if anything, not preaching their own religion or denominational, whatever you want to call it, but in terms of the social landscape and how the church was the place that cleaned up that street corner and took that street corner and told the folks, you're not going to occupy that street corner and make that street corner safe. Unfortunately, we see the church has been very ultimately quiet and extremely quiet, and therefore, and that's because of a number of reasons, and stop being that caring, when I mean caring in terms of wrapping its arm around a family to holistically be there for that family, mind, body, and spirit. So, in essence, the church was the mind, body, and soul of an individual. Now we're just the soul.
Can I say something? But we had the model saying the church plays a role in helping the family, and we have Ayesha saying we don't want the government to play a role in helping the family. But then how do you get the family's help? I mean, my mother was a retired guidance counselor. We hear a lot about, it's the parents. Every time the kid messes up, it's the parents. But my mother would always say, I never met a parent that didn't love their children and didn't want their children to succeed and go to college. But a lot of times those parents really didn't know how to help their children. And they didn't understand that you got to do homework every night for maybe sometimes 5 hours. You can't let your kid call in sick tomorrow because they don't, they have the sniffles. You have to. So I guess my question is, and where I'm not hearing an answer is, who does that then? When you have a system, when you have families that are so broken and parents who love their children but really don't have are not equipped, whether it's the chaos in their own lives or they just never learned. They just really don't know what it takes to succeed. What do you do?
Go ahead.
It's not the church, it's the government.
Yes.
Let's just go back to 1954, when Lyndon B. Johnson put in the IRS code that churches are no longer allowed to engage in political process. This is when we begin to weaken, our religious system begin to weaken. I'm 40 years old. I don't know how old you are. You don't have to say anything. I'm 40. So what happens eventually, it produces a generation of people who rely on the government rather than the faith-based programs. And I was going to make 2 more points. You know, my church, we own North Star Christian Academy. Okay, we take kids from the city all the time, and we graduate almost 100% of our kids at $7,500 a year, as compared to the Rochester City School District, astronomical. And can't graduate. I don't even know what the numbers are, but they're just terrible. And we spend half the money. Second of all, we have a third of the money. Whatever. We have a plant downtown on Broad Street where we just opened up a new chaplain's office. We hire people coming from the jail. I'm a jail chaplain. We hire people coming from the jails, and we train them in driving, welding. We train them in all kinds of programs so they can develop a skill, so we can overflow or somewhat cover up their criminal background. Because if people have a skill, you know, they are worth something to a person that wants to make money. So every year we pull in $1.3 million revenue, and we hire ex-inmates. This is a social, faith-based enterprise located in downtown Rochester called Hope Initiative.
So for you, it's about jobs.
Yes, because we're building human capital, and we don't want the government coming in telling people what to do every election time. People have an incentive to run for office. I want to run for office, but people, they got to have money to do that.
Well, and it used to be back, you know, and I feel for my community personally, when the grandparents die off, we're in big trouble. Because it used to be, again, when we go back to the family, there was the family unit, there was the church. Those were your 2 things that we leaned on in our community, right? I remember the day when we didn't have rent, right? And you have the chicken barbecue to cover your rent, right? That's what you did. You didn't necessarily have a program, or you'd go and be like, oh, I'm going to do anything that you could, because that's, you know, there is very empowering, right, to have something for yourself and knowing that you did something for yourself. That is a very empowering thing. And what I think, you know, I'm not saying to get rid of all, I mean, obviously we can't get rid of all programs, that's not what I'm saying. But I just think that it's too much, that we have created a culture that is corrupted. It's corrupted within itself because it needs itself to sustain itself. The government makes no money. It comes from us. So what happens, right? There's, you know, in order to, you know, a man who doesn't keep the fruits of his labor becomes a slave, right? We don't keep, right? If I have more of my money to give to my church, to give to my mom, to give to my sister, or to do something with, I am then empowered to take care of those people around me. If 40% of my income, and I'm lower middle class, by the way, goes towards taxes in some way, shape, or form, that means that now the only thing I can really care for is my family, because I'm lower middle class, versus if I'm keeping more of my money, I have the ability to say, you know what, hey, there's that, we'll do things like somebody needs a security deposit at church, everybody comes and dips in and you help them out.
But man,
Yeah.
here's the issue though. Not everybody goes to church.
That's right, but you don't have to, because there's lots of outreach. The church used to do a lot more outreach. Now the government has taken over those roles that the church traditionally used to do, like you said.
True, but keep in mind, I think that there is a role that government should play.
Absolutely.
And one of those roles should be always to provide some sense of access of services and goods for his people, not just law and order. Thomas Jefferson said it best. He said, in terms of the role of government, that it ought to provide safety and happiness. Now, that might sound simplistic, but in essence, there's a real deep value to that. Everybody wants to live in prosperity, wants to prosper. The question is, you have a great idea, I have a great idea. The issue is, how do we best arrive? At the end of the day, how do we best arrive at that
Why does
idea?
happiness revolve around money?
But I didn't say happiness revolves around money. I'm saying happiness can evolve around a whole host of issues.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, and I think all of us in this panel, all of us in this room, want to be happy. We want to be happy. We want a roof over our head, clothes on our back, food on the table. We got to have that. At least
John the Baptist didn't have a roof over his head, and he was happy.
Well, he's not in Rochester.
He was
So that's the issue. Okay. But that's the issue. No. Wait a minute. He's not in Rochester. And it wasn't as cold and snowing for him. So the issue was, is that we have got I understand of the extent of access, of the extent of services, and how far do government go?
Right.
And
That's all,
something
right,
we're gonna
that's,
touch on
right,
that.
right.
Yeah,
That-
we're gonna touch on
Okay.
that.
Right, that's all,
Okay.
yeah, I'm not saying, like I said, we're not gonna get rid of all programs, but again, there's a big difference between 20% of the population, because there's always, that's what they say, 20% of the population is going to always be poor, you're never gonna get rid of poverty. There's a lot of difference with that and having 101 million people, on food stamps in our country, and that's 1/3 of our country right now is on food stamps.
And it's not just because they're all lazy. I mean,
Who said that?
some of it is
Nobody
because
said
people
that.
are paid only, $8.25 an hour.
But nobody said that it was because they were lazy, that
Okay.
never came out of my mouth.
But I just want,
Yeah.
I guess what I'm
Yeah.
saying is, we're talking about people helping themselves, and we do have an issue right now in this country of people just not earning living wages, and these service jobs are multiplying and multiplying and multiplying, and you can't earn a living. You can't make ends meet.
Correct.
And you can't. Yeah, I mean, I think that comes down to systematic barriers that come up that prevent people from being able to take care of themselves and being able to take care of their family. I just met with a young woman today who had to quit her job because she has ovarian cancer. 26 years old. Went to social services. She was working hard, worked all her life. Came down with this disease and, does not make enough money to have health insurance, needs to have surgery, needs to have chemotherapy. She goes to DSS, they deny her for medical services. And so her choice was, do I die, not do anything about my health, or work? And so her thing was, I have to quit my job and take care of myself, and then I'll go back to work.
Broken
Those
system.
choices, people shouldn't have to make a
Get in
choice.
touch with me, I'll do a story.
But
on
she
that.
but she make a choice to quit your job.
they-
There must be something they're waiting for.
Well, I mean, you can say that spiritually, that there's something around the corner, but you're talking about people's lives.
No, this is not spiritual. I'm
And
talking about how is she gonna buy groceries?
Well, because now she can get social
Because
services
she
now.
has to now go on social
Right.
services.
This is what I'm trying to say.
That's
this
why
is
it's
a
broken. That's right.
That's
And we
why
agree
you
on
have
that. Right.
systematic barriers
Right.
Yes.
that are
yes.
in place
Right.
that a young woman would have to
Right.
make a choice
Right.
Exactly.
on rather to work
Or, and on the
not.
flip side of it,
And so you have these systematic barriers, and I think
I agree,
that's
yeah.
what some of you're going to
Right.
I just want
need
to make two.
programs to help people. My thing is just that when we look at it and you see that these programs in dollars start to grow, we're talking about millions and billions
Billions,
of dollars
right.
to deal with poverty, to deal with unemployment, to deal with these issues,
And it
and
gets
we're
worse.
not necessarily solving the
That's
problem,
right.
then you have to take a step back and you say, okay, how can I truly impact this? What are the things that we can do as government to change how we're doing business so that we really move our community forward? All of it. Because part of it is working, but we're missing something here. And what I think that we are missing has to do with this holistic approach about, the question earlier was about, how does government make these rules that impact families? Well, back in the 1960s and 70s, in order to get social services, a woman couldn't have a man in the
that's
household.
right.
1968.
So
That's
you
right.
couldn't have a husband in the household in order to get social services.
Who wrote
Well,
that? Who wrote that policy?
I don't know who wrote
Democrat.
The
it.
Democrats.
So you have to actually, your husband, and I
Had
know
to
the one that
leave.
this happened to.
Yeah,
He has to leave the house
that's
in
right.
order for you to provide for your family, and he can't get it. He's not able to get a job, or he's looking for work and things like that. So
That's
all
sad.
of these things play into it. I
Right,
just think that we need to take a step back, look at what we're doing, and how we truly are going
Absolutely.
to solve the problem, and also who's at the table.
Right.
Can I
That's
just make
huge.
this one point?
Yeah, yes, please. And then Tommy's next, so.
So, just one point about who's at the table. So, years ago, before you had Weight Watchers and, LA Fitness and all these other things, you looked at the body mass index. And a lot of people came around the table and they said, okay, well, we're going to lower the body mass index. So people went to sleep one day healthy, and they woke up the next morning fat. The people that made that decision were stockholders or people that had interest in weight loss drugs, in Slim Fast, in LA Fitness, and Weight Watchers. All of these businesses that really made this decision instead of you're fat because they want to make money. And so you have to take a step back and say, okay, well, who's at the table trying to solve this issue of poverty? And if those people are at the table and they've been there for a long time and the poverty isn't getting better, then you need different people at the table.
So you're Republican?
No. No, I'm a Democrat. I'm a Democrat, but I'm a Democrat that truly understands that it's about people. It is about how you serve people, and it's about helping people to help themselves.
That's a Republican policy.
Go ahead. There's a whole lot of stuff out
Republican
there.
policy is less government. I believe in government.
Only the Republicans aren't at the table. They're the only ones there.
I
They're not
believe in
there.
government too, but I believe in the historical position of government. Government is here to protect my money, protect my freedom, make sure my rights aren't violated. But whenever a politician get up and say, well, we need to help this family over here, that politician has no right to go on my bank account and take my hard-earned assets and feed someone else.
No, I would agree with that.
Well, that's you. That's the difference between a Democrat and a Republican. But now, when people come to me for counsel and say, I can't make money, I look at their check and they have all these deductions in their check. I said, do you know where all those deductions are going? Do you know where this money is going? And when I explain that to them, now all of a sudden, they don't agree with high taxes. They don't agree with all these subsidies out here because money's been coming out of their pockets. How do you think businesses feel whenever you have to tax businesses to go feed someone who don't want to put in a job application? That's not right. It's changing people's minds.
So then, what's your answer then?
What's my answer? My answer is this: limit the government, stay out of people's pocket, and that lady wouldn't quit her job just to get on welfare. Okay? This is why you have public charity. Every year I have to file a 990